going to criticize me for that. But our methodological rule was we only rate countries where we have data from these third-party sources. So Cuba and North Korea are two prominent countries. Saudi Arabia is not in the index either. Saudi Arabia is not a very open society for a lot of the data sources that we use. They're right on the edge, I think, of getting enough data that I can probably include them maybe in an edition or two away. But there's some of the Central Soviet republics like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan are not in there yet, for example. Same reasons. Data availability is the answer. This is the map of the world. Gives you sort of an idea of the patterns. This is, again, blue is top 25%, red is bottom 25, yellow is, and these are like shades of yellow and stuff, but it gives you an idea of where the rankings are. This, you can see really neat things like Chile in blue and Argentina in red. I mean, really stark differences like that. You can see the patterns, and some of it's kind of interesting. One of the things that you do miss when you look at these rankings is there's always a bottom 25%, right? And Africa is almost all red. There's some yellows and a couple greens, like Botswana is a little higher. But they're always in the bottom 25%. But there's actually been a lot of economic reforms there. The economic ratings have gone up in Africa. They're still in the bottom quartile. So the color-coded map in some ways hides the fact that there has been more liberalization around the world, but there's still bottom quartile. There's always a bottom quartile. And so there's always going to be 25% of countries that are going to be labeled red in this picture. But it's still a nice pattern. One of my favorite countries is that one right there. Anybody? This little green one right there. That's Turkey, of course, and Black Sea. You know? That's Georgia. Yeah. That's Georgia. It's the fastest reforming country in the world, not only according to our index in the last, say, 5 years, but also according to the World Bank's numbers as well, some of which we use, so it's not surprising, but we both have them as one of the most quickly reforming countries. So the former Soviet Union is really cool. I mean, if you like to follow economic reform and economic liberalization, the Soviet Union's breakup is really cool. You have Estonia now in blue. You have Georgia in green and one of the fastest moving countries in terms of the index. And then you've got Ukraine, which is still deep red, with basically no reform. Structurally speaking, Ukraine is like the Soviet Union never ended. It's just change of names on the letterhead, and it's otherwise the same in terms of the operation of the economy. So it's a lot of diversity is occurring in the former Soviet Union, and I think it's kind of interesting. Georgia, of course, has problems because of the Russia thing. I was actually there during the Russian invasion in August 2008, which was a lot of fun. My wife is here, and she'll remember that fondly, I'm sure. This is where we start to do the smell test, where we mix some chemicals. And it starts to address, I think, some of the things people are anticipating is, well, what are the relationships? Now, this is the picture. It's done by quartile. You can do it with more sophisticated econometrics, regression lines. You can throw in control. You do all the things you want for you econometrics nerds like me. But for simple purposes, this is straight out of the book. This is something that journalists can understand. And it's nice. The bottom 25% has an average income of about $3,800. So it's about almost an order of magnitude higher for the top quartile. It simply is duh, right? I mean, I think most of us knew that the countries that were scoring higher on this index had more productive economies. But this is really Smith's point. To the extent this index is measuring the degree the country is following Smith's recipe, and to the extent this graph is believable, that is to say these countries which are following Smith's recipe more closely, Smith said that countries that follow my recipe are going to be richer. And indeed, that appears to be the case according to these data. We've done it all right. So this is some limited evidence of that. It's just a correlation, but it's there. No one's really dramatically surprised by that, I don't think. But maybe you should be surprised by that chart. This is from Paul Samuelson's textbook. Paul Samuelson, anybody else younger than 40 know who he is? You know who Paul Samuelson is? He's an economist. He wrote the textbook that pretty much everybody over here took economics from, probably, right? If they took economics.
Larry Samuels.
Yeah, well. Paul Samuelson.
Larry Summers.
Larry Summers' uncle, yes.
Yeah, Larry Summers has 2 Nobel uncles.
That's right. Paul Samuelson is arguably one of the smartest people to ever grace planet Earth. I think he got his doctorate at Harvard at 12 or something. I'm exaggerating, but the guy is stupid smart. All right, and he wrote the textbook that almost everybody for 2 or 3 generations who took economics took from his book. It's not like today where there's like 30 different textbooks people can take from. In that day, there was one book and everybody took Samuelson. And this is a graph that was from one of the editions. I think it was from the 1964 edition of his principles textbook. And it's the United States and the Soviet Union. United States, these are index numbers here, but basically it's the level of income at the beginning of the period that says 1960. So he has the United States indexed at 100, and in 1960 he estimates that the Soviet Union was about half the income of the United States. But you can see the United States is going to grow at a certain rate, and he gives you some cone of some confidence, uncertainty there. But the Soviet Union is going to grow at a much more rapid rate, and somewhere right around 1985 or so, the lines are going to cross, and the Soviet Union is going to become richer. And part of the reason for this is because he thought the Soviet Union was investing more, but there's actually a line in one of the editions that's something like, countries like the United States are going to have to choose whether they want to grow more faster or be more free. Paul Samuelson thought that the Soviet Union was going to grow more rapidly than the United States, in part because the Soviet Union had less freedom. They had more planning. And he thought planning was going to give more income, faster growth, and ultimately more income. And then this is from an edition about 15 years later of the textbook. It's exactly the same chart, actually, except that he changed the dates 10 years later. Paul Samuelson is incalculably smarter than I am. But he could not have been more spectacularly wrong in that picture. So this previous picture, the one that most of you, when you see that, you go, yeah, duh. I mean, freer market economies do better. Duh, everybody knows that. Well, Paul Samuelson, one of the smartest people in the world, who won a Nobel Prize in economics, it was not obvious to him that countries like the United States with more freedom would grow faster and be richer than countries like the Soviet Union, which had less freedom and more central planning. It was not at all obvious to Paul Samuelson that that first chart would come out the way it came out. Right? Entire generation of people were taught economics and were taught that countries that had central planning were going to grow more rapidly and ultimately get richer. It turns out to have been fabulously wrong. Okay, and that's shocking. Okay. This is economic growth. Growth is a much harder thing to study with these simple bar charts. There have been dozens and dozens and dozens of studies, more than I can even count, on economic freedom and growth and changes in econometric studies, very fancy, published in top journals. The American Economic Review's had one, top journal in the profession. This guy named Jacob de Haan, who I don't even like, and I think he doesn't like me. He's a Dane? No, he's Dutch. Anyway, he surveyed all these literature, and basically the punchline is that all of the studies that he can find that study economic freedom, the index now, and growth show that more economic freedom and increases in economic freedom yield more growth. All the studies with all the controls, all the fancy econometrics and so forth. So that's nice. If you care about growth, this is where I'm getting to the instrumental question. If people care about growth, and maybe you don't, but if you do, then it looks like economic freedom is a explanatory factor, a powerful one, in fact. Not the only one, but it certainly is a factor. All right. I think time is getting late, so I want to hurry up. What's some of the other arguments that you sometimes hear? Well, free market economies, sure, they deliver the goods. People who live in market economies get richer, but they have too much inequality. You hear that one a lot. Well, I collected the data on the share of income earned by the bottom 10th of the population in each of these countries, and I aggregated them by the four quartiles. And it turns out, I don't know what you see, but I don't see much of a pattern at all. It turns out that no matter where you are on the earth, whether you're in a blue country or a red country or green or red, no matter where you are, the bottom 1/10 of the population will earn somewhere between 2 and 4% of the total income. Now, some places it's 4, some places it's 2, some places that are really more unequal is maybe 1.5, maybe the more equal place it gets up. But it's a very tight band, no matter where you are. And the key is it doesn't correlate at all with whether you're using a market economy. So I think one of the things that I've learned is that the argument that market economies create more inequality turns out not to be generally true. People who make that argument will cherry pick their countries. They'll pick the United States, which is a more market-oriented economy that has a relatively high amount of income inequality. And then they'll compare it with Sweden, which is a country that has lower economic freedom, but more equality. And they'll say, look, I found a country like the United States, and it's up here, Sweden. But that's just cherry picking your data. If you look at the whole world, and you look at the pattern of the whole world, it turns out it's not generally true that market-oriented economies have more income inequality. In fact, I guess if anything, it's a little bit better, but I'm not going to push that. These are all statistically the same. Yeah.
Does that hold true if you use the Gini coefficient?
Yeah, it does too. And the reason I don't do the Gini coefficient is for the same reason that these are simple bar. Journalists don't know what Gini coefficient is, so these are all pulled from the textbook. Geez, they can figure out what bottom tenth is and all that, but the Gini coefficient is true. The other answer is that they're all the same. Obviously, if you have this data, you can get Gini coefficients. These are all derived from the same raw data. But, and this is the level of income by the poorest tenth, not the share, but the level. Really mimics the first picture, but if you care about low-income people, you'd rather be rich in a blue country, or rather be poor in a blue country than probably anything in a red country. This is a nice graph. I like this one. This is life expectancy. I have happiness, but I don't have it in this PowerPoint because I just added it to the book, and it's in the next edition. So next time I do this talk, hopefully I'll have the happiness one. But it looks just like this one, by the way. If you have the happiness, I used the Happy Life Index. Do you know this one? It's one of the more popular ones. It looks exactly like this. Again, it doesn't mean that you cherry pick. If you look at Sweden and the United States, you might find a little bit of a mismatch. But in general, the countries that have more economic freedom have higher happiness ratings on those happiness indexes as well. So again, life expectancy is up here. This is the environment. There's an environmental performance index done by some folks, I think, here at Columbia. Actually, I think this group, some scholars at Columbia do that. Higher numbers mean better environmental performance. So again, it's not proof, but if someone says free market economies or market economies hurt the environment, it's not obviously true. That's all I'm saying. It's not obviously true. I mean, maybe there's some trade-offs with environmental quality and markets, but it's not obviously true that market-oriented economies have worse environments. In fact, if anything, it looks like the environmental indicators we have from this environmental performance index that these guys do, it looks like they get better environments in the more market-oriented economies. So, yeah. This is the Political Rights and Civil Liberties Index. This is from Freedom House here in New York City, and a great group. I'm a big fan of their work. I wish they were a little bit more transparent about how they compile their data. If any of you know them, I should tell them that. But this is the number. Just a little bit of note. The Freedom House numbers, lower numbers mean more freedom. So I inverted the scale to make it look better, make it look more intuitive. But you'll note that the numbers are actually, I think they're backwards myself. Their scale is a 1 to 7 scale, and 1s are good. Like the United States gets a 1, and Cuba gets a 7. It seems to me it's backwards, but that's how they do it. They've been doing it that way since 1970. So, they're not going to change now. All right. Many people are interested in the United States and what the trends are overall. This just gives you an idea here. You can see that from 1970, the blue line is the average for the United States, and it peaked about 2000, and then George Bush was elected, and it went down. I'm not blaming George Bush. I'm just making an empirical observation. And then it's been pretty much flat since then. I can tell you the number's going to go down in 2008 when we release the new edition in 3 weeks. It's going to go down a little bit more for the United States for 2008, and I expect it's going to be going down in 2009 and 2010, but we'll see what the data say. This is the world average. You can see pretty much, and then flat, and then you can see this is sort of the worldwide liberalization that occurred in the 80s and 90s. This is the global reduction in marginal tax rates, the global reduction in tariffs and quotas, the global stabilization of money, and a lot of deregulation around the world as well. And again, some leveling off in the 2000s. But